Hi, this is Bill Hartzer, and this is the Digital Marketing Podcast with Bill Hartzer. And today I have the pleasure of having Tony Wright from WrightIMC. Welcome, Tony. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into the search industry. I know I've known you for at least, since 2003, 2004 at least, right?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill. This is my 22nd year doing search.
Yep.
So I've been, and I think you and I met back. I think it was around 2003.
Sure.
My background was I started out in public relations, doing the digital. I was the digital guy for a very large PR firm, and got thrown into search because they frankly needed somebody who could figure it out, and I guess had a proclivity for that. So my
Sure.
my first search client was American Airlines, which is a pretty big one to have. Worked on them and have worked on them for most of my career, and then got into as things evolved, I started getting more and more into search, and then pretty much by 2005, 2007, I was doing pretty much full-time search, and not just kind of as a one of my duties. It was my whole duty, and then started WrightIMC in 2009. And we've been going now for since then. So
So it's been over 10 years now for WrightIMC, right?
It's actually this is actually year number 12. So
Okay.
So if we look at it, so that it's we've been around the block, have the scars to prove it, I guess you might say.
Yes, definitely. So a couple new things this week that have come up. There are, increasingly some new information that Google has put out that they're measuring more information about your page and basically wanting to provide their users, Google search users, with a better user experience. So as your page, in fact, loads quicker and provides a better user experience, then you could potentially rank better in the Google search results. That's
Sure.
what they apparently have, and they're calling this Core Web Vitals, which is some information that they're providing right now in Google Search Console. And we've noticed, just you and I looking, kind of randomly, that they're showing data that's back to about a month or so at least. I'm looking at the report right now, and it's back. I'm showing about at least May 1st or so, even around April 1st.
Yeah, the one that I just pulled up was showing back to March 30th, the first date that any data shows up. I think it's interesting that Google is kind of revamping this, putting it into Webmaster Console. Obviously, we've known speed is really important for a long time. And then I think it was Gary Ilias came out and said it's not, it's just one factor, which I'm sure that, that's kind of a typical Google answer, if you will.
Sure.
There's obviously tons of factors, but the fact that they're putting this into Webmaster Console, it's a lot of the same metrics that we see in the Page Speed Insights and Lighthouse tools that Google has. It looks like just from, obviously this is pretty early days, and you and I are just now really looking at this today as it comes out. But it looks like they're putting a lot of emphasis on first contentful paint, which is a little bit different than true site speed. It's, how quickly is the experience coming up? Because you can have a page that loads pretty fast, but if certain elements aren't loading really fast or it's not usable, then that is a bad experience. And I agree with Google at maybe looking beyond just specific, how fast does this page load, to not just how fast it loads, but how fast is it functional? Because and especially a mobile experience. I mean, how many times have you seen something, background picture load, but you can't do anything while you're waiting on the page to load? So it's probably something that a lot of guys that have been, hey, I can get 100, I can get, a score of 100 on the PageSpeed Insights tool. Well, that's fine, but it may be looking at that first contentful paint. We may need to shift to looking at how quickly you can actually get your site functional as opposed to just how fast you can get it to load.
Sure, exactly. So there's so many different ways, kind of look at it, and we know that people have mentioned, time to first byte and, and so forth. And certainly, and one thing basically it comes down to also is that, if you're using a shared hosting and you're not using any kind of caching or anything, it can take 7, 8, 10 seconds or more to even load the typical page, unless you kind of optimize that page at least to make it load faster. And so it does have an effect on the overall user experience.
Definitely, and I think that who knows if this is down once 5G starts becoming a true factor. Who knows how long penetration for 5G will take, but it is
sure.
But most people on desktop aren't worrying about speed. If the site's not loading fast, they're gone. And we see that in new clients that come in that have very older sites and slow loading sites, that once we've just fixing those issues, you can see an exponential increase in conversion rate. So it's not just Google that this is important for, it's actually money that it's important for. Sure,
exactly. So one thing we were talking also about, kind of shifting gears, is the other ranking factors, is certainly their on-page factors. But one of the things is I like to call more on-site factors, and looking at content and content pruning. You talk about, you have a website that might, I know even I have a blog that's been around for, almost 15 to 20 years, and I've got, over 1,000 posts. And so it's a matter of, looking at a website, not just on the actual how fast or how long it takes to load that page, but let's look at the site as a whole and determine, okay, well, is there content that really is outdated or content that needs to be just to go away? And we kind of, we think of that actually as, even can think of it as essentially a ranking factor that affects, overall visibility. How would you go about, thinking about content pruning and pruning some of that old content?
Sure. Well, and it's funny. you and I are talking a little bit before. I'm dealing with this with a site right now that has over 10,000 blog posts, and some of them are not as high quality as maybe that back in the day they were just writing 200-word blog posts or just throwing some things up that are and repeating themselves, and especially in social media, that was actually a tactic back in the day, was kind of, every other day we're gonna repeat ourselves, and just to make sure that it gets out there. Well, you've got all this basically thin content garbage, and one of the things, it's not an easy task when you have a huge number of blog posts. Most people can do it pretty quickly, but just what we've done is download, putting all of those in a spreadsheet, going through each one, saying which ones, without the benefit of even looking at traffic, which ones need to go away and which ones don't. And I say to do it without traffic because you'll get hooked. You see, actually, I'm going to tell you, we did this on WrightIMC. We had something about the Facebook graph that was driving. It was by far the most visited page on our website. And when I, redirected that site, all of a sudden it looked like my traffic dropped like crazy. But in reality, none of that traffic was helping me. It was an outdated old post that had old information that was accurate at the time, but not accurate anymore. In fact, it was making us look bad to have that on there. So we did cut it. But if I looked at it from a traffic standpoint, I would start freaking out. We're going to lose half our traffic, and clients will say that, but you got to understand, traffic is not what's important. It's conversions and money. And but going through, listing all of those, going through and saying these absolutely have to go. And then after you've done that, it's also grouping them so that you can say, okay, I've got 10 blog posts on this topic. Can we consolidate these into one very authoritative piece that we keep updated and we, really have this thing as the end all be all piece of content on this particular topic. And then taking that, and then of course, making sure the technical aspects, when you're doing this, if you have links pointing to one page, you might want to keep that, the URL that has the links, 301 redirect, all the other pages. It is, I always kind of compare SEO to, I say SEO is not rocket science, it's more like plumbing. You could probably figure it out by watching some YouTube videos, but frankly, I'm going to probably flood my house if I'm trying to fix my sink. So I'm going to call a plumber, and it is really just hard work going through and organizing that content, creating those flows to where you can, have those. I'd much rather have one very strong authoritative piece of content right now than 10 pieces of content around the same thing that cover different aspects. Now, there are times when, and there's judgment calls here, but what you're trying to do is serve the user. So.
Yes, exactly. And one site I was involved in working on was basically had a lot of, they would write a tip every day and on their main topic. And so we ended up with, hundreds of posts that were, here's a tip, there's a tip, here's another tip. And just basically consolidating all those tips into one longer, post. It ended up being, let's say, 10,000 or more words, but it actually was all these different tips combined into one page that then someone could look through. So there's different ways to kind of approach it. And then, then there's also a different way to look at, whether or not it is content that is more evergreen content, like maybe something like tips, or actually news type of articles. If it's a blog that maybe have, kept up on, let's say news, or they were more timely posts, and so there it's a kind of a different approach there. I mean,
definitely. Keeping up with your content is hard work, and the old stuff, especially. You kind of got to make a decision on those, how are you going to archive those posts, leave old posts up? Some of the, you and I both, I know that you deal with this with clients where they come to you with some blog post that was back in 2010. It's no longer correct information about our industry. That doesn't only happen in SEO, that happens in all industries. And if you have old information up there, it can actually take away from your authority. So making sure that you're either archiving that and making sure people know that that's old, or consolidating that information. And that every site needs to, has to make that decision for themselves how they want to handle it. But in my opinion, I'd much rather have that one stronger authoritative piece. And this is, I think some of these sites, really got into the QDF, the query deserves freshness. We need to have, even to the point where people were, changing the dates on every blog post so that it looked, like it was fresh. And I don't think that QDF is quite as important as authority these days. I think on certain topics, it obviously is. If there's something going on in your industry, QDF is important. But frankly, for, like you said, evergreen posts, I don't think QDF, it's not going, just looking at the SERPs anecdotally, I can't tell you I've done any studies on this, but anecdotally, I'm seeing posts that are authoritative showing up over newer posts and outranking them.
Sure. So then we talk about, we're talking about posts, but if we shift a little bit to the news, and traditionally news websites have, let's say just a typical newspaper that used to be a printed Dallas News, for example, and they've gone online, and a lot of the policies, even for years, even back as far as the late 90s when they were publishing their news, traditionally their policy has been, any news articles that have, that are older than, say, 6 months to a year, I've seen them just completely kill those pages, and just remove that content completely, and only have the latest, 6 months of news articles out there on their site.
Yeah, I wish more would do something like that, especially, if we get into some of the reputation management work that I do.
Sure.
We still see stuff that's hanging around for years. In fact, just recently had an article that was showing up that was 10 years old, for a client. And luckily we were able to get the publication to remove that one. But in that case of Dallas, the Dallas News, DallasNews.com is a good example. They've gone from firewall to non-firewall to archiving to, they've changed how they've set that thing up probably 10 times in the last 10 years. And so what's indexed on there is a mess. And that's a lot of news sites. And, creating archives, putting that stuff to where people understand that it's older, even to the point of having, I don't necessarily condone having pop-ups on them, but at least having the date very visible so that when it does show up, people understand that it's older. There are ways to structure that content to where Google understands that it's older, and more importantly, your users understand that it's older. And so, even looking at some markup language and how the dates and putting that on there to make sure that everyone understands that this is this article that was about this law back in 2010 is may not be as accurate as the one that was just written last week.
Sure. Yes, and so there are ways, like, for example, even I have seen creative ways that they've done it where, not talking specifically about Dallas News, but just news sites in general, that they've moved content over to a subdomain like archive.whatever.com and so forth, and
even just folders, in the structure can sometimes help.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Definitely.
So specifically, so a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about reputation management and what are the options, as far as if you have you search for your name and you have an article that mentions you, but it's not really, it's not very positive and you want to get it removed. What are kind of the options there to try and either get something removed or trying to get an article, moved down? What, kind of how would you approach something like that?
Sure. Well, the first thing that I have, walked through anyone who has a reputation management issue is, let's look at, first is what is being said, is it true? Is it, sure, or is it something that's absolutely false or a half truth? Basically trying to understand, is this going to end up being a legal matter or a search matter? Now, sometimes we have to combine them because the legal system runs a lot slower than the internet. But if there is defamation, I work with a number of attorneys that I refer out to that can basically, if we can get a judgment against, even if you don't know who wrote it. In fact, Kent and Bill, Kenton Hutcherson. I'm a huge fan of Kenton. He specializes in kind of these John and Jane Doe lawsuits where you sue somebody for defamation, even if you don't know who they are. And if we can get a judgment, the judgment is, once you get a judgment, you can send that to Google and Bing's legal team, and that URL will be removed from the index. So it loses, and most of the time, once you get something removed from Google, it doesn't have teeth anymore. People aren't finding you. So that's the first thing to do. But the second thing I always do is kind of look at it from we need to do an impact analysis. How much is this really affecting your business? There are some times when, if you've got deep pockets and it's an ego thing and you just hate that it's there, we can try and push it down. But frankly, pushing things down anymore it's never been a guarantee, and it's not a guarantee at all. I've got one right now where I'm not going to go into who it is, but it's a software company, and they have forums on Microsoft.com that are showing up that are kind of bad mouthing their software. It's not stuff that's untrue. It's just stuff that somebody doesn't like their software. That's going to be really hard to push that down. I like to nowadays, instead of trying to push something down and hide it, it's more of, let's create a better story. Let's create a better reputation for you. Okay. So let's put stuff out there that answers that question, or puts the other side of the story. This guy doesn't like this piece of software because it doesn't work on a specific type of computer very well. Well, that's not because he gave it a 1 star doesn't mean that everybody else who the software works for is going to give it a 1 star. It may work great for them. So we have to, create that better reputation. But the thing is, it's not just creating that, but making sure that those items also are showing up in the same SERPs as the negative stuff. And, one of the things about doing that, the more we get, there is a scarcity on a SERP. When you're typing in a query, there are only up to 10 blue links, within the maps and the reviews and the ads and everything, but there are only so many spaces. So if you do get those spaces, it will push things down, but you can't guarantee that you're going to beat the Microsoft.coms of the world. But if you can show up right underneath them with, here's the headline in Microsoft.com, here's our answer to that, and it's somewhere else right beneath it, then all of a sudden you can create a better story for your product and basically blunt the damages that someone can do when they're putting out negative stuff about you. Now, if it's something that's, legal cases and things like that, we obviously work with lawyers a lot on this type of thing. And if it's personal stuff, there are ways that, we like to deal with, one of my first things that I do also do that impact analysis, first of all, to see if you want to spend the money. But then the other thing is, sometimes it's okay to contact a publication, the writer of a publication, tell your side of the story. Sometimes they'll write another story about you. Sometimes they will, I've even had it to where, we don't want to take it down. Well, hey, here's a little piece of code that you could put on that page. And all it is no index. No index, no follow. You do that, it's gone. They won't always do it. And there is the risk always that they could end up writing another negative story about you. But that's why you have to do the analysis, get somebody who understands and can, research the reporter to understand who they are and what they're doing, interact with them. It's not something you don't just do it out of the blue. You got to understand all the aspects and the risks. And then if the risk is acceptable, that is literally the fastest way to get something down, faster than any other way, is if you can get the author of the piece to take it down.
Yes, exactly. And the site owner, and especially if there are just information in that article or on that page that's incorrect. That can be also helpful as well.
Sure. Sometimes it's just, sometimes they may have gotten the story wrong. And as a former journalist, I can tell you that was my job before I got into this 20 some odd years ago. If I got something wrong, I wanted to know about it. And you can get people get defensive, but if you can show them, hey, no, you wrote this, and it's not opinion, this is the fact. Most of the time they'll go in and fix it.
Yes, and even my own blog posts, I have had over the years, writing over 10 years, I have had and welcome, updates to articles and posts, and I've even, I have deleted my own posts after something was posted, and that, it was explained to me, and I just didn't feel like the post or the article needed to be there anymore. So there's definitely options, and journalists and writers and so forth, we're all human, and you just need to, some cases just get in touch with them.
Yeah, I mean, and it even goes back to that content pruning. If you've written something, sometimes you as a blogger and other people, I know you, Bill, and you're big on trying to get the scoop and get it out there as quickly as possible. And a lot of times you don't have, you might not even have all the information when you're writing that. And so if new information comes to light, you're a reasonable guy, you're going to, add that in. And that's what all we're asking for in many cases.
Definitely. So we're just about out of time. So tell me how to get in touch with you, and if for any online reputation management or content pruning or even page load speed, you and we've mentioned these new core web vitals today. So how can we find WrightIMC?
Sure. The easiest way is just to go to our website. It's www.wrightimc.com, and that's WrightIMC.com. It stands for Internet Marketing Consulting. So WrightIMC.com. I'm on Twitter at Tony N, as in Nathan, Tony N Wright. And then also, if you really want to find me, just type in Tony Wright search, and there's about 1 million ways you can contact me there. And I'd love to hear from anybody if you have any questions, or obviously if you need any help with reputation management, SEO, paid search. WrightIMC is a full service digital firm. We actually even build websites. So we'd love to work with you to talk to you about your project.
All right. Thanks again, Tony. This has been the Digital Marketing with Bill Hartzer podcast for May 28th, 2020. Thanks again, Tony, for joining me this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill.